NaNoWriMo is now imminent with only a few days left in Preptober. I haven't written any original fiction since high school, so this is going to be interesting. The prose I write has mainly been case studies and accounting textbooks. And so last year when I did NaNoWriMo for the first time, I set myself a really low bar. For NaNoWriMo this year, I was tossing up between whether I should do book 2 of the fixed fic or whether I should actually take the plunge and write some original fiction. I've always wanted to write an original fantasy work. It's something that I've been thinking about since my final years of high school. Then I got talked down to doing one because critical essays are meant to scale a lot better than original works of fiction, and that was going to be better for getting a high UAI, which is the entrance score in Australia that you're required to use to get into university. And the thing that was holding me off was 1, I was terrified, and 2, I have done zero outlining, whereas I had actually already done all of this work on the second book of the fixed fic. But my writing group was hounding me to the point of making all of these memes, so fine. I'm doing something original for NaNoWriMo this year. I am so terrified, which I know from past experience means that this is something that I should definitely work on. Before I set any goals and KPIs for this year, I wanted to revisit my performance from last year. Not only will that give me a really good benchmark as a starting point, it's also going to make sure that the issues I had in the novel I wrote last year will be something that I actively work on and try to get better at this year. Last year, I was aiming for the bare minimum. 250 words per hour, which is on the very low end of how fast you have to write as a pro writer in order to make a full-time income, and 50,000 words, which is the basic NaNoWriMo requirement. I ended up doing about 300 words per hour and almost 57,000 words. What really slowed me down was doing a lot of editing as I was writing. I've done something like 500 words per hour using Write or Die, so I feel like 400 words per hour is not unreasonable to aim for this time round. At this stage, I haven't been back through to revise that particular draft, but my gut feeling is I probably need at least another 15 to 30,000 words to do the story justice. So this year, I am setting 75,000 words as my goal word count. My other KPIs last year were all about creating believable characters, making sure that the prose was at least not bland and repetitive, and fixing the worst of the structural flaws in the narrative of the original work. When I got to the end of NaNoWriMo, I didn't immediately hate what I wrote, which was a big plus for me because usually I write something and then I'm just like, it's terrible. Yeah, I find it really difficult to be objective about my own work. Other people apparently didn't think it sucked, so that was kind of very gratifying and a nice little confidence boost. What I wrote was far from perfect though, and I did get some specific feedback on areas that I should work on next. I think what's going to be the most difficult for me this year is world building, and specifically world building where there is no pre-existing framework for me to draw on. I did plenty of world building last year, but it was mostly fixing things about the original world building that had really bugged me. This year, in trying to tackle an original work, it means I have to come up with a fictional world out of basically nothing. If you've been following my Preptober live streams, then you'll know I've been really following Brandon Sanderson's methods. He essentially divides world building into 2 categories: physical elements and cultural elements. Physical elements are those that would exist in the world if there were no sentient beings there, whereas cultural elements are elements that are present because of the sentient inhabitants of that world. And what Sanderson recommends is deciding on 1 or 2 of these elements of your world and then flowing the implications of that change through to how the rest of the world exists. The best example of this is in Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, where the world of Rosha has a very particular weather pattern of high storms that blow around the planet, and they are extremely devastating. And then he extrapolated what that would mean in terms of the flora and fauna of the planet, in terms of the architecture, in terms of the culture, in terms of the religion, everything. And it all grew from the single idea of what if hurricanes were just normal storms? My world building is very far from complete, but I have actually built out a reasonable amount of my magic system, which is the most important part for a progression fantasy. So we're gonna see how it goes. I have a feeling that I am going to be doing a lot more world building as I kind of write B chapters. That's gonna be a pain in the backside for revision, but I'm kind of out of time for prepping, so we'll see. One particular thing I was very bad at last year was having enough subtext in a lot of my dialogue exchanges. My chapters were about 5,000 or 6,000 words each and had typically 2 or 3 scenes on average. A lot of those scenes could have been shorter or achieved more, and I just lacked the skill and the ability to actually be more efficient about it. So that's one of the things that I want to work on this year, and I thought the best way to measure that was to make sure every single sentence that I put down on the page is actually achieving 2 things. For example, I want every description that I write to be, 1, conveying the setting, but also conveying the character who is doing the observation. Finally, the other thing that really slowed me down when writing last year was whenever my outline had things like, they arrive at a super awesome cool city, I would just sit there when it came to writing time and just be like, I don't know what to write. I didn't figure it out until much later that the reason I was struggling was because the outline was crap. They arrive in a city that has no conflict in it. I got a lot of feedback saying, hey, you spent all these words describing the city and it doesn't seem like any of it matters. And of course it didn't, because there was no conflict. And so this year's KPI is all about fixing that, because I don't want to end up with another book where I've got large chunks of boring scenes that don't go anywhere. Now, to make sure this is actually possible. Last year was my first time doing NaNoWriMo, and I finished by the skin of my teeth. I have a history of taking on super ambitious projects and then underestimating how much time and effort it takes to complete those projects. The only reason I got through it was because I made a detailed plan, which I posted in a public forum and had people holding me accountable for it. To win NaNoWriMo, you need to write at least 50,000 words during the month of November, which roughly translates to 125 hours if you're doing roughly 400 words per hour. So right off the bat, I know 4 hours per day is my absolute minimum. I also know from past experience that I do much better and I have a higher chance of completion if I 100% focus on a project. So I do actually want to do the whole 75,000 words in the month of November, which means at 400 words per hour, I need to put in something like 188 hours. Based on my schedule and experience from last year, I know I'm gonna do better if I'm just writing consistently every day. Otherwise, I just sit there and freak out about how I'm not adding any words to my word count. So what I'm gonna do is write super early in the morning, and I'm also gonna do more writing sessions in the days during the middle of the week when I have childcare. I've also incorporated a bit of a buffer. That way, if I have a terrible writing day or something happens or whatever, that's okay. I should still be in a good position to make it up on the other days. One thing I regret from last year was not being deliberate in how I set up my writing habits. I found that I have really good accountability when I'm live streaming. So for NaNoWriMo this year, I will be live streaming every single one of my writing sessions. That's going to be my cue. Every stream is going to go for 2 hours. I'll be following this workflow on every stream, referring to my outline and also using this progress tracker to keep track of my word count. And then I'm going to end the stream by doing a little self-review of what I've written during those 2 hours, writing some revision notes for myself, and then entering the word count into the Nano word count tracker. One thing you'll notice about my schedule is I have kept some afternoons and most of the evenings free. This was important for me to do because this NaNoWriMo is kind of going to be a test case for me to see if I can actually write some prose fiction and sell it. And if I can, then I kind of need the writing schedule to be sustainable for the long term. That said, I am making one concession, which is that during the month of NaNoWriMo, my normal Friday uploads are going to go on pause. If you would like a writing buddy, or you would find it amusing to watch me freaking out about how terrible my writing is, then you should check out my channel page where you can find the upcoming live stream sessions, or follow me on Twitter. I'll also be doing weekly reviews of my progress and uploading those on Friday, and then we'll resume normal programming in December. And finally, a really important part that I did not do whatsoever last year is the reward. Sanderson opens new magic cards. I am going to permit myself to read one chapter one chapter in a book that I have been dying to read, which is going to be Gideon the Ninth until I can get my hands on Reaper. If I had to grade myself on my readiness, I would probably give myself a D because my outline at this point is nowhere near where it should actually be. I have kind of worked out my characters, but my plot at the minute is a little bit of a mess. I find Sanderson's framework really useful in terms of trying to figure out if something is not working in a particular draft, but I actually really struggle to kind of use it as a tool for outlining, mainly because he outlines backwards, right? So he's always like, I have this super cool image of a really awesome scene in my head, and I just kind of I sit there and I'm like, I don't know what would be awesome. Like my brain just doesn't work that way. What has been more helpful to me is Mary Robinette Kowal's MICE Quotient method, because instead of relying on particular plot archetypes or plot arcs or what have you, it looks at plot in terms of its focus. And it also works like coding in that you nest plots inside of each other. So that's just easier for me to grasp with my coder brain. At this point, I do not feel ready, but if I waited until I was absolutely ready to do any kind of monumental task, then I would probably psych myself out of doing it. So we're gonna do this, and we shall see how I go. I don't think I'm going to be able to do 19,000 words in a day, but I do hope that I'm going to be able to get in some monster word counts of my own.